Okay, so hello, everybody. This is Ghostrock's Meet the SME, and we are going to be listening to Brian White today. This session will be co-hosted by myself, Karen Brewer, and George Hodges, and we are going to be listening to Brian's expertise on DDAs and films and processing and exposure factors for film and digital detector array radiography. The presentation will cover exposure factors for film, commuted radiography, and digital detector array radiography utilizing radioisotope exposure. So there will be a question and answer session at the end where all the mics will be open to ask questions. However, in the past, we have found that some operating systems still do not allow speech or sound. So please feel free to send questions at any time through the chat box, and either George or myself will read the questions to Brian so he can answer them. So you can use the chat box at any time, but vocal questions will not be allowed to happen until the end. And with that, I am going to hand it off to Brian White of Carestream, an industry expert in this field, and truly remarkable that we were able to get him to give this talk. So let's give it up to Brian.
Thank you so much, Karen. I appreciate it. And my name is Brian White, for those who don't know me. And I was a Kodak person for a number of years. I worked on designing films, and then they asked me to design computed radiography imaging plates. And I did that for about 7 years. And then I decided that my former coworker, Steve Mango, he was having so much fun over in non-destructive testing with digital imaging. I decided to come over with him. That was in the fall of 2012. Time flies when you're having fun. It's been about 10 years now that I've been doing NDT digital kind of work. And truly have enjoyed working in the industry. So today, what I have for you is some work that we've done through the years regarding exposure factors for radioisotopes. And one thing that I realized back when we were teaching classes was that there were film exposure factors that were published out there, but there was nothing on digital systems at all. So we decided that we were going to take that on. So first, a little bit of background here. So let's see if I can get this to advance. Okay, there it goes. So let's talk about dose and radiography. You know, we typically don't think about dose. It's something that the medical physicists think about more, but everyone's familiar with exposure factors. But dose is a quantity of radiation for a specific exposure. And in the United States, we think about dose in terms of Rankins. That's a unit of exposure for radiation in air. That's what's coming out of the X-ray system or out of the radioisotope source. 1 Rankin is a quantity of radiation that ionizes 1 cubic centimeter to produce electrostatic charge unit. Again, things that radiographers don't typically think about. That electrostatic unit is 3.3356 times 10 to the minus 10th coulombs. So again, our primary goal, our goal was to provide guidance on both film and digital. And when I started to look at this, which was a few years ago, we realized that even for our films that we had, our exposure factors were out of date. The work that had been done there had been done by Mike Holloway. Some of you may know Mike. Mike did that work back at Kodak in the mid 1990s, like around 1995. He only did it for iridium. And at that time, the films were a little bit different, and the processing chemistry was a little bit different. So we decided that we were going to take on the films as well, and I'll show you those results. So here what we're doing is we're going to calculate guidance for starting exposure time so that you can get a target optical density or gray value through the base metal. Computed radiography, I'll show you here. I have a little bit on that, but there are a lot of variables in computed radiography. It makes it really difficult to do the work for CR because so many things can be changed all the time. But I will show you an example of that and give you guidance for what we recommend there. So what we did was we had a masked steel step wedge. I'll show you a picture of that in a second. And when I started the work, actually, we had started out by shooting flat field images, and we quickly realized that the results that we were going to obtain were much better when we actually attenuated through a material. So that's what we did. And then there was a lot of discussion here in the beginning about how to approach it. We decided that we were going to shoot for a specific thickness, depending on what source we were going to use. So I used 1/4 inch of steel for selenium. I used inch of steel for iridium, and a higher level for cobalt. I forget, it's been so long. So again, our data, we had a source of detector distance of 12 inch for film, and we did 24 inches for digital detector array radiography. And we had access to all 3 radioisotopes that are common in the industry. So we had iridium, selenium, and cobalt. So this was quite a massive undertaking that we took on. I spent many trips back and forth to our radioisotope lab, which is in Buffalo, New York. I'm in Rochester, New York. So that's a 90-minute drive from my house up there and a 90-minute drive back. So that made for a long day. So we ended up putting lead between the table and the detector just to minimize scatter control there. And we used vinyl cassettes with front and backside LEDs. In all cases, again, minimizing scatter control, and in the case of film, that was there for intensification purposes. And with the film exposures, we removed the protective overcoat from the EnviroSeal LEDs so that we got the most amount of intensification that we could get. For the digital detector array radiography that we did, we decided we went ahead with 9 average frames for that work. And we went ahead and we utilized commercially available phone programs as for the calculations, and I'm going to show you examples of that. So again, back here at Carestream, we had talked about coming out with our own app, and we quickly again realized that there was already in place a very large number, well, significantly large number of options for exposure calculators that already existed for either iPhone or Android. Those were already in place. So I came up with the idea of, why don't we just go ahead and just supply people with the exposure factor information and let them use the calculators that they're already using, that are already available as tools. And then that way we wouldn't have to, maintain any kind of, program changes as operating systems changed and things like that. So that's what we did. I'll show you an example of that. So here's a couple photos of my setup. There's a step wedge, and there's an example of the source to the collimator with the phantom mast with the vinyl cassette underneath it, and there is lead underneath that. And yes, that is a wood table, believe it or not. So it's real life here. So many of you know wood is a great scatterer, but we did use that table, and we put lead underneath there to help absorb the scatter. So I don't know if some of the newer people maybe haven't dealt with these, but I know the older folks have. where you remember these slide rule exposure calculators. And here are the two that we had that were Kodak Carestream. One was in English units, the other was in metric. And I was using these when I first started in NDT, and quite frankly, I had a hard time with them. It seems like I was always going off a scale, uh, you know, squinting of the eyes, trying to see, am I really where I need to be? And I personally was feeling frustrated using these as a tool. I'm would rather have an Excel spreadsheet or do an input where I can put a number in and get a number out and not have to be, you know, dealing with these things. And here's the backside of the English unit one. And there's the old film exposure exposure factors that Mr. Mike Holloway did way back when to achieve a target density of 3.0 with AA 400. The R factor was 2. If you can squint and look at that. So 3.0 density up on top, AA 400, you go over, and for example, that would be an exposure factor of 2 that you would put into that calculator to get a time that you would have to crank out the source. So again, I wanted to get away from that. We started with a physicist here that we were working with at the time. He put together an Excel spreadsheet that we were using for a while. And then I decided that I was going to go back and just redo everything and get everything up to date so that that was, information that would be available for everybody to use. So here are the results. And each table is separated by the radioisotope type. So I have iridium, selenium, and cobalt. About 90% of what people do out there these days is going to be iridium. So selenium, cobalt, much less common, but we did them anyway because we, why do you climb a mountain? Because it's there. So we did that. So again, I had all of the different film types, M100, MX125, T200, AA400, HS800. So those are all Carestream films. I'm from Carestream. I have Carestream film. I use Carestream film to come up with these exposure factors. So again, if I, just an example on table 1, if I wanted target density value of 3.0 through the base metal of a certain thickness with a certain Curie source, I'll show you an example of that here in a few minutes. Then my exposure factor that I would put into that calculator for, say, MX125 3.0 density would be 3.9 to give me the exposure time. So again, this is guidance. This is meant to be a starting point for people so that it takes some of the guesswork out of, being able to figure out how long they need to expose something. And we went through and we verified this and we're pretty good across the board, pretty close to where we need to be. So the data that we collected was definitely good. So we did a verification step, and here's the actual data here, again, by radioisotope source, iridium, selenium, cobalt. So what I did was I took those linear responses of each film. So the film density would go up in a linear manner as a function of dose. And I, put that into Excel, and I solved for X in this case, and ended up back calculating to calculate these exposure factors for all these different conditions. And as I said, it took some time to go through and do this for all the different conditions. But at the end of it, what we had updated, exposure factor tables for all 3 sources, all the films, all modern chemistry, all modern film formulation when we were done. That is going to be a tool for people to use. And then they're going to be able to use their phone calculators that they already have. All they have to have is the table of numbers that we have published out on our website, which I'll show you where to go get that at the very end of the presentation. so that they can have a starting point for exposing whatever film they may be using. So that was film. So from film, I went on to foolishly think that I could come up with exposure factors for computed radiography that would not be, that would be kind of consistent with what I got with film. And what I found when I got into this was, in our case, we have 2 different readers. We have 3 different plate types. And we allow the customer, the radiographer, to select the voltage on the amplifier for the photomultiplier tube. So we got 10 different settings. So you got 10 settings there. We happen to have 2 different laser power settings on one of the readers, the HPX1 Plus. And then we have 2 different scales for computed radiography, 16-bit linear and 12-bit log. So what I did is I went through and I did a particular set of conditions, a particular case here. But when you add all those up and multiply them all together, that would be 180 different possible tables that I would have to come up with if I wanted to cover all of this, which even if I only wanted to cover a portion of it, it still becomes, it becomes to be, it's just way too much work. It's just not possible. And even for the condition that I did 2 data scales across 3 radioisotope sources for a particular imaging plate at a particular pixel size and amplifier setting and laser power. And that still was pretty involved. And the results from that particular experiment that I did there are here. So again, it was an HPX1 Plus reader, high laser power PMT at 10, which is the amplifier turned all the way down, HR plate, 50 micron pixel size, for the 3 different radioisotope sources, 2 different data scales. And, I ended up with these exposure factors. Again, these verified very well for those conditions, for what we looked at. But what we recommend now is, because so many different things can vary in computed radiography, we recommend that people just start with the film exposure factors and use those as a starting point. Because again, if I change my plate type, or if I go to a 100 micron pixel size, or any of these things that I might be changing, then the numbers change for that. So we don't publish our computed radiography exposure factors because they are always going to be different depending on what people are doing. We just recommend that they go back to the film exposure factor table and start with that. So then for me, one of the big things was I really wanted to have exposure factors calculated for the digital detector arrays, which I enjoy using those for what I do here in the lab. And there were a couple different DDA types that we had at the time. One is a 14 by 17 inch, 139 micron pixel pitch. That's on the upper left. And then the other was a 10 by 12 inch, 98 micron pixel pitch detector that's down on the bottom right. And the one on the bottom right, we offer that in 2 scintillators. So the scintillator on the one on the bottom right, the smaller one, was DRZ fine. We also offered that in DRZ plus. And the scintillator that we offered on the 14 by 17 inch detector was DRZ standard. So I have all of that here in a table. So this is currently the 5 different detectors that we offer. They're really grouped by pixel pitch capability, resolution capability. I have the active area there as well as the overall size. They're all cassette size in terms of how thick they are, the weight, scintillator use, pixel pitch, image resolution, the array size, which is the total number of pixels, rows and columns. Multiply that together to get the megapixels, millions of pixels. The binning options that we offer for static binning. There's only one detector in the portfolio right now that offers 2x2 static binning. That is the 4336GH. And then the array itself, where the actual pixels are, where the photodiode thin film transistor array is, the Carestream built detectors, those are on polyimide, which is like a plastic. And then the other two detectors are still on glass for now. So the polyimide is a little more forgiving to drops and shocks and things like that. So that's why we had moved part of the portfolio that way. So again, when I did this work, I had started with the 3543 and the two 2530s. These just happen to be some of the linearity plots of how the detectors differ in terms of their difference in exposure, how they respond to dose, pixel intensity responds to dose. So the two that are on the upper left portion of the graph there, that's the 3543 and the 2530 with the thicker scintillator. Those two are up there. And then the two in the middle, that's the 2530 higher resolution detector, as well as the 14 by 17 inch 4336 detector. They're very close in response. And then the one that's down on the bottom there, that's the 75 micron pixel pitch detector that we have, which has a thinner scintillator, and that requires more dose because the pixel pitch is so much smaller. So we designed the portfolio so that the 3543 PE and the 2530 GC or PC, sorry, so that those would require exactly the same amount of exposure. If people wanted to use two different sizes, you could expose them the same. And also for the 4336 and the 2530 PC, those are the same. So I misspoke before. It's the PA. Yeah, it was the PH. Let's see, you got too many letters here. I can't keep track of them. But it's the PH and the 4336. Those two are the same for exposure response. And I did not come up with that naming system. So P is polyimide, G is glass, and then the second letter designation that corresponds to the image resolution that's achieved. So here are the results after all that background. And again, it's 16-bit linear scale. I have the three source types. I have a desired pixel intensity through the base metal. And again, we have iridium, selenium, cobalt, 3 different detectors. And those exposure factors, one of the really interesting things that came out of it that I learned, which was really pretty obvious when we thought about it, but one of the reasons that medical radiology went to digital detectors is because of the dose reduction that you can receive, that you can count on there. Patients going to receive much less dose, and it's the same technology used in industrial that is used for medical. And what I was able to find is that the exposure factors that were required for the digital detector arrays were about 300 to 400 times less than film and CR. And that's a pretty big difference in terms of the amount of exposure that's actually required to form the image. And again, people have been able to take advantage of that over on the medical radiology side. Of course, with us, we don't worry about it as much, but we do want to have great productivity and go fast and get really high quality images, so we can take advantage of it that way. So again, all of this work was done, took quite a long time. A lot of calculations and verification and things like that to come up with these tables. Here are the individual plots, linearity plots that I used to be able to do the math there. So again, I wrote white paper on this, or it's all in there in the white paper. If you're interested, you just let me know. But we, went through and generated all that data. And at that time, at least as far as I know, that was the first time that anybody had published exposure factors on DR panels that I know of, but maybe somebody did it we weren't able to find anything published out online or anything. So, and we did it again for those 3 different detector types. So let me just show you how we would actually take advantage of this information. So again, we're going to determine the exposure time, which would be either the time that the guy cranks out the source to expose the film or the CR, or the integration time that's set on the detector. It's going to give me a target optical density through the base metal or a target pixel intensity through the base metal. So I am going to enter my source type, the activity of the source and Curies, the thickness of steel that I'm going through. And this was done only for steel because, again, a lot of the radiography that's done with radioisotopes, that's primarily all steel that's done. The exposure factor that I showed you from the tables before that we did all those calculations on, the source to detector distance, and then we're going to calculate that exposure time or integration time based on the tables that we had there. So here's an example for the 3543 139 pixel pitch DDA. It was iridium, 50 microns. I wanted to go through 1/2 inch of steel. My target base metal pixel intensity, I said I wanted to get to 6,000. I took my exposure factor from the table of 0.0237. I have that highlighted down there on the table below. My source to detector distance was 24 inches. And I used my phone calculator and I went through that, and it came back with a starting guideline of integration time at 2 seconds to get that target pixel intensity through the base metal. So what does that look like? So let me run it here. So here's my phone. There's the app. I select Iridium 192. I'm going to put my activity in there. It's 50 Curies. I'm going through 1/2 inch of steel. My exposure factor from my table that I've created is 0.02 something 37, and I'm at 24 inches. Then I am going to hit calculate, and it's going to tell me that I need a 2-second integration time. Pretty slick, really nice to have that kind of starting point. So you don't have to guess, you don't have to waste as much time guessing. This particular this particular app that I have on my phone, I have an iPhone. This is the one called X-Ray Timer from Lance Henderson. And this is now available both for iPhone and Android. So this one's real popular. There's another one called Gamma Calc Pro that a lot of people are using that you know you could use to a co-worker of mine several years ago. He put together a list of all the commercially available apps. There were at the time like 6 or 8 of them that were kind of common that people were using. And again, so we found that with Lance Henderson's program that he had with the gamma constants and some of the different other things that he was using, that this was pretty close to the Kodak slide rule calculator. So we said, well, you know, we're Kodak and our numbers were Kodak before for the slide rule. So this is one that we like to use. So again, let's do another example. So again, this is going to be the 3543 139 micron pixel pitch DDA. Now we're going to do selenium. 30 Curie activity. We're going to go through a 1/4 inch of steel. Let's say my target that I want to get through in the base metal for pixel intensity, let's say it's 12,000 this time. I take my exposure factor from the tables that I've created, 0.0195. I've highlighted that down below. Now my source to detector distance is 18 inches. And I run the calculation and it comes back with a 3-second integration time. So let's see what that looks like on the calculator again, just to reinforce how this all goes. I go to my phone. I bring up the app. X-ray timer. Now I select selenium as my source type. I'm going to put in my activity, 30 Curies, steel, 1/4 inch. exposure factor from my tables I've created. That's going to be, looks like it's 0.019 something. Oh, looks like maybe it quit on me. We'll try it again. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I know when I was checking this out before, it had quit on me before. So sometimes it makes it through and sometimes it doesn't. Oh, it looks like it's not happy. Oh, there goes 0.02, 0.25, 0.019, 5, 18 inches. Calculate. And we're going to get 3 seconds on that calculation. Maybe not. Works fine on my phone, doesn't work so well on PowerPoint. Here's our image dialog box that we have for our acquisition. And again, I would take that integration time recommendation that the exposure calculator came up with, and I would enter it into the integration time box up here, which is above the averaged frame count box. So here in this UI that we have integration time, we have frames for frame averaging. I got my detector type, I got my detector serial number, and I have my offset gain and pixel map corrections that I'm applying to do that capture. So here's another example. So a question that people ask is how much pixel intensity through the base metal do I need to get sufficient image quality? And that's going to be through trial and error that you're going to know for a specific material type or thickness with a specific detector that you want to get to a number of like around 9,000 or 6,000 or whatever you may be doing. So again, for 9,000 there, I would find it in the table, 0.0366, go to my calculator, iridium 50 curie, steel 1/2 inch, R factor 0.366, STD 24. And again, here calculation would come back with 3 seconds starting integration time to get that, to achieve that pixel intensity through the base metal. Again, this is a guideline. It gets you started. It's not perfect. Sometimes it works perfectly. Sometimes it's close. Sometimes it's okay. But generally it's pretty close. So I'm going to wrap up here. So again, exposure factors were calculated for Carestream film and digital systems exposed to the 3 most common radioisotope sources. Pretty good agreement for all the validation and verification we did on this. It really does get us into a good range, especially with Lance's program. Really nice tool to have in your toolbox if you're doing radiography or radioisotopes. And again, for CR, we recommend utilizing the film R factors as a starting point. And I have here the website, where if you go to our website, you go to Resource Center, then there's 2 PDFs in there that give both the film R factors and the digital detector array R factors are there, published. You can download it, keep them. I've referenced these on my phone, on a job site where I've needed them. I just go into the website, pull them up on my phone, then I can pick out the R factor I need and use it if I need to. Also, I've written a white paper on this. That's available. If you want it, let me know. I can send it to you. That's all I have for today. And there's my email. If you wanted to email me and ask me for that information, I can give it to you. It's no problem. It's just a publicly available paper. And I appreciate your time today. And at that point, I think that I will open it up for question and answer.
Sorry. Sorry, it's taking me a minute to find the
Hi, George.
Hey, excellent presentation. Hey, we had a question earlier. Let me see where it was. Pull this up. Make sure I get it right. Okay, comment early on. The vocab chair should use pixel value, not gray.
Well, I know who that came from, so I watch out, man. Yeah, yeah. I know where that's coming from. So
I think I use
correct.
that. I think I use
Yeah.
that one interchangeably myself. But
Yeah.
another question now. Will your presentation, are you willing for this presentation to be available afterwards? Karen may have already asked you, but I thought I'd check with you.
Sure.
There's the what we've done is published them on the Ghostrock website.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Sure.
so
Yep. It's all
there'll
public
be some other
information.
ones out there. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought I just want to make sure. I imagine Karen had already asked you, but I had not heard the answer on that one.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we'll make that available on the Ghostrock website. Let's see, another question. Can this be correlated to X-ray?
Great. Great lead in. So that is one of the questions that I have. It's part of a it's part of a bunch of work that I want to do that I haven't had time to do, that I'm going to do. We're going to have a new guy starting with us. His name is Mark Allen. Mark's going to be starting with us. And a couple things that I want to do specifically to this work is I wanted to redo some of the computer radiography work at higher amplifier settings that were more representative of what people are using and more representative of what the competitive systems are at. So I wanted to do that. And then the other thing I wanted to do was I wanted to try to correlate this back to X-ray or create X-ray. If I couldn't correlate it, then create X-ray exposure factors for my system. Now that the problem with X-ray is that different X-ray systems can behave differently. So you have that, but at least I would have something that I could share there. So yes, I plan on doing it. I don't have it at this point, but
excellent. Yeah, that'd be very useful for a lot of us, I think.
yeah.
But a comment, outstanding presentation covering a huge amount of careful work. Thanks for sharing. Have any other ones right now?
Okay, so I'll ask a question myself. One of, again, I mentioned this a little bit before, but one of the questions I get is about what pixel intensity do I need to get sufficient image quality? And, for example, with our systems based on our amplification of the voltage that we do in our DDAs, which is pretty low compared to other competitors, we know that once I get to, somewhere around 3,000 pixel intensity through the base metal, that I'm going to have sufficient contrast sensitivity at, say, 4 average frames. This is all like experiential, learning based on just using it and just knowing kind of where I need to be for certain settings and things like that. We had talked about giving guidance on that and ran into a similar situation of so many variables changing that it would be kind of hard to cover everyone on that particular situation. But again, like I can give guidelines for our detectors specifically. It really is like if I'm doing 4 to 9 average frames for radioisotope iridium, if I get to about 3,000, I know I have sufficient contrast sensitivity from looking at the image quality indicators, looking for a 2T hole or a required wire. That's just how I base it. So that could change depending on thickness and scatter and a whole bunch of other things. So, this is going to give you the pixel intensity through the base metal only, but it's not going to tell you the sensitivity part.
Okay. Anybody else?
So I'm going to give this presentation again at ASNT Nashville. We have a technology spotlight session that I'm going to do this live and in person there. So anyone who wants to catch it again can catch it there if they would like. And we do have plans again to do this work on some of our newer detectors that we have in our portfolio. So again, it's just so time consuming to go do the exposures that you really gotta block out and allocate your time to do that. But we do have plans to do that also, to try to complete everything here. So
I have a question. You in the beginning, you talked about the exposure calculators. You and Steve didn't develop your own because they were already readily available for both iPhone and Android, which makes all kinds of sense. But is there a particular one that you recommend to be using with radiography as opposed to the medical field?
the one that I use is called X-Ray Timer. And when you go into the App Store, if you type in X-Ray Timer, it'll come up and it'll say Lance Henderson. And that's the one that I use. Some of the other guys I've encountered out in the field are using Gamma Calc Pro. That one had two different options for the gamma constant, which confuses things a little bit. But that one works well too. And then I think there are many others that work well also. But again, the one that I work with is Lance's because it's very simple. It's like the homepage of Google. You know, it's not cluttered. It's real simple in terms of it's clean to enter everything in. And also, as I said before, that one agreed well with our slide rule calculator from Kodak that we had. So that's what we went with.
Thank you. Thank you very much. For the audience, we are having some technical difficulties. I have unmuted every single person individually, but I'm getting barraged with messages through the Zoom program that if someone is not using the proper or using not proper, but the same version that the webinar is on, I'm getting notified that they're not going to be able to talk. So if you do have a question, send it through the Q&A and just type it in. And I've also gotten
Karen, there was a comment on that. I can no longer hear after being switched to panelist. There's a comment in here. Can you switch me back to attendee? You know, it's from Greg.
from Greg.
I don't know if you'd seen that one.
I don't even see Greg on here anymore.
Okay, he maybe left.
Yes.
Okay, are there any additional questions, George, that came in or?
Let's see. Couple comments. Thank you. Thanks for this. Also be at AS&T. Let's see. Hasina asked, great presentation. I've had difficulty finding films for a neutron application. Could you share who you would recommend for that, please?
Yeah, so yeah, neutron is a tough one. So the neutron films, they were 50 speed, single-sided coded films that Carestream exited out of probably a good decade ago because the volumes were so small. And then the last that I heard was that Fuji was still selling their single-sided, slow speed film for Neutron. But I had also heard that there were supply issues and problems obtaining that too. We had gotten some inquiries about whether we would coat single-sided, and it's not something that the business wants to do because the volumes are so small. So it doesn't surprise me to hear that. And the other thing concerning film is that as the film volumes have dropped in the factories, there's 4 film factories left in the world. There's an Agfa in Belgium, there's a Fuji in Japan, there's a Carestream in Colorado, and there's a Kodak in Rochester here where I live. And as those volumes have dropped, it's getting tougher and tougher to keep them going, and source of supply issues and a lot of things like that. So just like with what happened with the pandemic, it's like you can't get your purple sneakers anymore. All you can get is the gray ones, because that's all that they'll make. And I think there's similar things going on in the film world where it's just getting harder and harder to produce all those different variations. So unfortunately for Neutron, I'm not sure how that's going to go. We had discontinued our medical duplicating films, for example, which caused some problems with reference radiographs and ASTM being made. So we're starting to see these kinds of problems are starting to happen, unfortunately.
So, all right, any other questions? I don't see any more coming in. Yeah, the film availability, I think, is going to keep going down until eventually it'll be, dinosaur, extinct.
And cost is going to go up too, because they don't have the volume. So I believe there will have to be, further consolidation at some point. The first job that I had at Kodak, I worked in what's called Building 38 here in Rochester, which was the new film factory that they built in the late 80s. And that's the one Kodak film factory that's still going at this point. And then we have our facility is in Windsor, Colorado. But again, the volumes, and again, a lot of the medical film, a lot of that is gone. It's not completely gone, but a lot of it is. People have switched to digital, right? So that's why interest here in giving people, the ability to consider the newer technologies. It's all part of the transition that's going to be going on over the years. Okay, anything else?
I don't have anything else.
Okay, well, I just thank everybody for attending, and if you want something, let me know, and I can supply you with that information. And it's one of the things I worked on that I'm proud of, just because of the amount of effort it took, number one, and then the just being able to figure out how to pull it all off was took a little bit of thought, but we figured it out. And I think it's a pretty good tool for people to have that, have those numbers out there and available. I think it can be helpful.
So Brian, could you maximize the screen that has your contact information on it, please?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yep. Excellent. I always tell people, call me anytime. It doesn't mean that I'll answer, but you can call me anytime.
I know so well. We have another comment that says, great presentation, Brian. Thank you, from Sherritt Campbell.
Oh, yeah. Sherritt. Yep, sure. Yep. Thank you, Sherritt. Yep. Send me an email, call me, whatever it takes.
So Yes, thank you so much, Brian. This was wonderful. Ghostrock is looking forward to putting on more of these. So if anyone out that's still in the audience, if there is basically a lecture that you'd like to hear or a topic that you'd like me to come up with a speaker for, please just send me an email and let me know. George as well. Either one of us, we are working this one together as co-hosts on this. And the project is intended for information and information exchange. So any topic that has to do with radiography is on the table. Just let us know what you want to hear. And we will see about getting a subject matter expert. I can't even talk right now, to give a lecture for what interests you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
Great.
George, Karen, for having me on.
Thank you so much for agreeing to come on and
Thanks,
share
Brian.
your wisdom.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Yep, have a great day.